My guest today was a planner in public and private practice. He had worked in planning for the city of Kitchener for 30 years. Then he worked in private practice. In 2006, in the municipal election, he offered his experience, skills, and expertise to the citizens of Kitchener, but narrowly lost that election. In 2010, he ran again and was successful, and was elected a councillor for Ward 8 in Kitchener. He was reelected in 2014, but lost his re-election bid in 2018. I'd like to welcome to the Old Grey Mayor's podcast, Zyg Janecki. Zyg, thank you. I got that name. Yeah, I got the name right.
Right on.
Thank you very much. Listen, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, much appreciated. So the Old Grey Mayor's podcast is about, reaching out to former local politicians to, capture through our oral history, capture the oral history of their time in office and just sort of preserve that a little bit. So that's sort of what we're going to do, talk about things what attracted you to running, why you ran, a little bit of background about yourself, and talk about some of the things that, you were involved with during your time. So why don't we start out with, so I understand you started working for the city of Kitchener in planning, but did you graduate from the University of Waterloo? Is that where you came from?
No, I'm born and raised in Toronto.
Okay.
And I went to University of Toronto, finished my education there at U of T, back before at Arundel College before it became Mississauga. And when I graduated there, then of course you look for a job and applied a few places and was selected and joined the City of Kitchener City Hall in 1973, just after regional government came in.
Oh, right. Yeah, 73. Very exciting times.
So a lot of the staff that were at the City of Kitchener and different departments, engineering, planning, clerks, wherever, ended up going to the region and starting to work there because they needed staff. And then all of a sudden there's a bunch of vacancies, and I ended up taking one of the vacancies.
At the region?
No, at the city.
Oh, sorry, at the city, yeah. And did you think it would be a long-term thing?
I initially thought I would stay a couple of years or so, get a little bit of experience, and then go back to Toronto because that's where my roots were. And and I got into planning only because I loved what was happening in Toronto. Late 60s, brand new City Hall, Eaton Centre was under development, the Gardiner Expressway was just completed. CN Tower was in the discussions. Ontario Place was in the works, or actually was already opened up. Wow. So I thought, hey, this is great. It's municipal planning, what will the city look like in the year 2000?
Yeah,
I got to get involved and be part of it. So that's the field I went into, and of course, working in Kitchener, you need a bit of experience, and then go back to Toronto. But I love Kitchener because it's only an hour away. Price of housing and cost of living was more or less half the price.
Yeah.
And, got married here and so decided to stay, raise a family. Been here 50 years.
So tell me, before we get into the political stuff, what were some of the big projects you were working on through the city of Kitchener? What would have been the new city hall, I guess?
I was involved with the new city hall, not the one that was built in 73, because that was just the Oxley Tower, because they tore down the old city hall, back at that time. But the new city hall in 73 was in the works, and I was part of the plenary sessions that we had with the public to get a feel of what they wanted. So I handled some of those and trying to feel, well, what do we need in our new city hall, etc. So like skating rink, a square, openness, accessibility to the public, stuff of that nature, parking underground or above or whatever. How big should the building be? What should its architecture be like? So there's a variety of things that I was involved with, but I wasn't the lead on it or anything like that. But I was just part of a group of the city hall planners who were involved with the public engagement.
Yeah, because I've had Mayor Christie on former Mayor Christie on
Oh,
the
yeah.
show,
Yeah.
and we had some discussions about where they were going to put the city hall.
That's true too.
And
Yeah.
there was some debate about down by where the farmers market area is right now versus where it is now. So that was kind of an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I was involved in that. That was more political.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember all those discussions too.
Okay, but let me ask you then, since you're working on that, was there a thermostat or some barometer or something that was supposed to be on the top of the building? And did that ever work?
Yes, there was talk of doing a weather beacon on that, similar to the Canada Life building in downtown Toronto at Queen University. And it had a gauge of, if the lights were run up, that means the temperature is going up at that moment or that day, and it was going down. And then it would be in different colors, red or blue or white, to depict whether it's sunny, rain, or snow or whatever. The cost of that was, I guess, maybe prohibitive to a degree. Technology maybe was there because they have it in Toronto, but it just didn't materialize in the end. Yeah, I remember that discussion. I forgot about it.
Yeah, I was just wondering. It just came to me now. So, okay, so what other big projects were you involved with while you're with the city then that you can remember from the planning?
Well, from a planning perspective, I was really more involved with subdivisions, new growth of subdivisions in areas. Down in Pioneer Park, Beechwood area, Forest Heights, out in Grand River. I sort of did a lot of that development because I was involved directly with the developers and their consultants on suburban growth, greener pastures, as we were referring to them. And downtown, I didn't really get involved too much on that, sort of other planners, but I was just working out more from the outskirts, having the city expand outwards. Regional government had come in. The city doubled its size in land area. In fact, more, it almost tripled its size from before 73. So there was all this farmland that was sort of begging to be developed. And of course, developers were buying up the lands and wanted to come forward with their housing projects. And I was involved dealing with a whole bunch of them.
Was there, I did some interviews with Jean Halboom, and one of the first ones we did was she was involved with an issue about a road. It was sort of a collector road that was supposed to go through Dune, and there was a big fight on her part about what this road was going to be or what it was going to do, and it was on the planning schedules for the city of Kitchener. So it was kind of an interesting discussion about her involvement on that. I don't know if you remember Jean from that time at all. Oh,
yes, I do. She was. I was working at the city as a planner, and she was on council. So I've met with her several times over those years, and she was very much heritage oriented. I was involved with heritage as well, being the city's rep on the heritage committee, but also dealing with land development. So I was trying to make sure that some of the older buildings and structures were preserved as much as possible, if they were doable. And dealing with her. And of course, you're trying to develop road networks, whatever. They also have to tie in with sewer expansion because when you flush the toilets, they got to go by gravity and all that stuff. So you got to find the easiest way. So engineering sort of had an important factor in terms of street designs and which way everything will be created.
Path of least resistance.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so after you spent your 30 years, I mean, you retired from the city kind of early, I guess, right? You said you were 53 or 54?
Yeah. Of course, the city had, as part of OMERS, of a pension plan that you get to contribute to.
Right.
And they have a 90 factor, which is how old you are, number of years that you work. And if it works out to 90, you can retire. Or you can still continue working if you want.
Sure.
Well, OMERS came back and said, well, we got a lot of money. Let's reduce the factor down to 80.
Wow.
And so now I qualified. I didn't plan to retire at the age of 53, but the numbers were there. But meanwhile, there were some developers that were looking for me to work with them in a consulting field. So I thought, well, maybe I'll retire and then go work in that field as well. And decided to make that move, which I did.
And how long were you in private practice?
Well, I would say 9 years. I spent 5 years with planning and engineering initiatives.
Yeah.
When I ran in 2006. And when I didn't quite get in, I continued planning on my own
okay, 4 more
so I had
years.
a few clients that were still interested in having me as opposed to being with a company. So I worked with them and helping them along, getting their approvals, whatever they needed done.
So while you were in private practice, you mentioned you were on the Heritage Committee when you were working for the city. When you retired from the city and was in private practice, were you still on the Heritage Committee, for example, for the city of Kitchener?
Well, when Heritage Committee was created back in the late 70s, it was referred to as LACAC, Local Architectural Conservancy Advisory Committee.
Right.
And so when the committee was formed, because there was a lot of development happening in downtown Toronto, tear down the old houses on Margaret Avenue or Aaron's or wherever.
Or downtown Kitchener, you mean?
Downtown Kitchener. Yeah, sorry, downtown Kitchener. And put up these apartment buildings, and the residents were all upset in the area. All of a sudden, there's a building being destroyed and an apartment being built. And so this committee was being formed, and they wanted a resource person from staff, and I was asked to be the planner to represent staff and help them out, answer any questions, and help them along in terms of getting any approvals or whatever needed to be done. So I did that for a few years, and then I could sort of had that interest. I grew up in an old house in Toronto, built in 1893.
Oh, okay.
I had the Victorian style house, so I knew what houses looked like because I had lived in one for almost 20 years.
Right.
So yeah, I could really appreciate that. So where was it going in on this? So
you were because I was asking, like, you were on it while you were working for the city, but then you left the city, and I was wondering if you were still on whatever Heritage Committee.
Well, I did, and so basically, after I left the city, I was in the consulting field. I applied to sit on different committees. I sat on the Heritage Committee. I sat on Committee of Adjustment. And help them, and do that, my networking with the city from an outside point of view, the consultant's point of view. And so I did that. However, I took strong positions on behalf of the committee and appeared before council to argue the saving of certain buildings.
Yeah, let me before we get to that, because we'll talk about the Forsyth building, for example. But so at one point you're on this committee as a employee of the city of Kitchener. And now you're on a committee as a outside constituent or whatever, right? You're not an employee.
Just a member of the committee from the public.
Yeah. And so how did you find that? Was it different in terms of the interaction? How did you find that?
No, it was fine. It was I knew what was required because as a staff person, you know what needs to be done and your resources that you have available. And so when I joined it, I was more proactive on the committee in terms of let's investigate these buildings, try to save that, or whatever needed to be done. Where I was a staff person, I just accepted instructions from the committee and the chair and go research that and report back with your findings, sort of thing.
Yeah. So you're waiting for instructions when you're an employee, but when you're a private citizen, you could be a little more. You felt proactive.
Right, yeah, because then you saw what buildings you had of importance that should be preserved, and you worked at it with your committee and your other members.
So you mentioned to me the Forsyth building, for example. What was the situation there?
Well, in that particular building, it was right next door to the new city hall.
Yeah,
that was built on Yonge Street, and the building. Well, Forsyth had their operation of making shirts and pajamas and clothing and all that type of stuff. And then they closed down and the business went elsewhere to China probably. But anyways, the building had heritage because there were portions of the building that were Art Deco inside, outdoors, etc.
Yeah, I remember the exterior on Duke Street, if I recall correctly, had some, because I used to go to St. Jerome's High School for a few years. So I remember
yeah. So they had that Art Deco thing and we wanted to preserve it and try to bring it back into some type of potential use if anybody wanted to do it. The city had became owners of it after a period of time, but the building was sort of falling apart in parts, especially up in the roof area, that when it snowed or it rained, flooding would take place on the top floor. And then the water would all accumulate and then seep from the 5th floor down to the 4th to the 3rd. The boards were starting to warp. The floor was, falling apart, and leakage was up. And all they needed to do is just sort of cover up the roof by fixing it somehow.
Yeah.
Council was not interested. They sort of said, yeah, we understand. Thank you very much. And then move on to other topics. And nothing happened.
So you were delegating to council at the time?
Well, our Heritage Committee at the time thought that Forsyth Building should be saved. But to preserve it as best as possible, let's get council to spend a few bucks and save it and protect it from the elements. And they weren't doing that.
That reminds me back in North Dumfries, we had one of the old ice houses. There's only like 4 of those in Canada or what have you. And the roof was a terrible structure. So we contributed some money from our council, and we got the members of our Heritage Committee to do some fundraising, and we were able to get enough money to fix the roof, put a new roof on top of it, so at least it wouldn't continue with water damage going down the walls, the stone walls, causing more damage.
Same scenario, but we got nothing. Wow. So the committee was being stymied by council. We'd send a report to council with our recommendations, and they would not act on it. And so because of that, and I was the vice chair of the committee, because the chair was a member of council. So I spoke on behalf of the committee and appeared as a delegation and chastised them for not neglecting their responsibility, because they also have due diligence as stewardship of the properties that they own.
Yeah, they own it.
We're not going to do anything. And I said, well, it was ridiculous. How could you be elected and ignore what your job is supposed to be? And each one of you didn't do what you're supposed to do.
So
they didn't like that.
You left the committee.
Well, no, I stayed on the committee, but then you get reappointed the following year. I was history.
You didn't did you apply to get reappointed?
Oh, yeah, I applied because I enjoyed being on the committee and working with the members of the other people and with staff. But council said, Zyg's a troublemaker, and he...
What year was that? Because you ran in 2006.
That would be about 2005.
Okay. So the next year you decided to run for council.
Yeah.
Was it largely because of that issue, or
that was one of the issues?
Yeah.
But then I was working as a consultant, and because I had the planning background of the municipality, of how zone changes and subdivisions and everything works, and I know the process and what you have to go through, time periods, etc. So I was working on behalf of the developer and go before council to make the presentations or work with staff. And I was being roadblocked. Well, we can't do that. I said, what do you mean you can't do that? I did that back 5 years ago when I was on staff, and now you're telling me we can't do it? Bullshit. So basically, I was being stonewalled there as well. And although staff were polite about it, but they said, no, the rules are changing. I said, the rules are the same. I've worked on it. I know what the bylaws say. And the agreements and the official plan, you can't fool me. And then you go before council, and council says, "Well, we agree with staff." I said, great. This has got to change. So I got to run.
Yeah. So you got to run. So you ran like where you lived, or did you pick a different ward, or what did you do?
Where I lived in my ward.
Yeah. And so did you get some people to encourage you to run as well?
No. Well, some people have said, you have a strong opinion, and you'd be a good candidate. But it was my own volition to do this.
Gotcha.
I felt very strongly like the public was being screwed in terms of not being responsive by council,
right,
by staff to a degree. Yeah. So I said, I got to get in there and make changes and be able to do that. And the only way to do that is to be a member on council.
Yeah, that's what you found out. I mean, you knew what it was like from working there. You saw what it was like from being an outside in, and the only way to do anything is be the inside in.
Exactly.
So 2006, you're running against who'd you run against?
Jeff Lawrence.
Anybody else, or just you and Jeff?
No, it was just the two of us. Jeff had been on council for 15 years or whatever.
At that point, it was 15 years already.
I'm just guessing about that, because he had been there for a while.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought I'll run against him. But what really struck me when I started canvassing, going door to door, I prepared my literature. I had help from people I knew in the who had ran previously, from Richard Christie to Don Cardillo, to a couple other people in the city of Waterloo. So I had my networking already connections, and they told me what to do and how to do it. And so I started doing door to door right early in the year, back in April, and even though the election's in October. And as you go door to door, you find out a lot what people have opinions on. And one of the strongest things that came out is, where's our councillor? Where's Jeff Lawrence? He's never around. We contacted him we have an issue. No phone calls, no response back, nothing.
So that's what you're hearing from the constituents, lack of response.
And I just thought, well, maybe I have one or two people, they're going on and on and on. And I go, wow.
So how did the election end? You lost, but what was the outcome?
Oh, I don't understand the question.
Like the number, I mean, how close were you? Sorry. How close were you?
Just about 100 votes.
100 votes. So it was a close run.
Out of we each got about 2,500 votes each, and by about 100.
So that was very encouraging for you, no doubt.
Yeah, but as I heard afterwards, I scared the shit out of them. To put it bluntly.
Yeah, probably did.
So come 2010.
So you decided to run again.
He stepped away. He decided to run into region because there was a couple of things there.
Let me ask you though, during those 4 years, did you get involved in anything else in the community, or you just?
Well, I wanted to, but I was being stymied by council and thrown off, or not reappointed. Let's say not thrown off, but not reappointed to Committee of Adjustment, not reappointed to Heritage Committee, and there's a couple other committees I applied for as well, because I wanted just to be involved. Because if you're going to run in council, you got to show your involvement with these subcommittees.
Yeah.
But they didn't want me on there. No, he's a troublemaker.
Oh, so you were labeled, were you?
Oh, I was honored.
So in 2010, then, so Jeff doesn't run. You're running. Did you have some competition again? Yeah,
two other people ran, and one of them was Scott Pitkowski, who's now working at the.
At the school board. Okay. Yeah.
So he ran, and I beat him. And there was another person. I didn't know those two people at all.
Yeah.
I beat them both in the end. So
okay. So you get elected, and now you're on. What were some of the first early things that do you recall? What were some of the first early? Well, actually, first let me ask you this: when you were running, did you have a platform, like some certain things you were running on in 2010?
Basically, proper responsibility at City Hall, and also on the experience that I could provide of having worked at the city for just under 30 years, plus being in private practice. I could, I've been there since regional government started, so I can tackle whatever topics you want, whether it's a little severance application or a committee of adjustment variance, or you want me to represent you at the Ontario Municipal Board.
Yeah, I mean, you had that planning experience, which is very valuable, I would say, for anyone who's going to sit at the council table. For sure.
It's hugely important, I thought.
Yeah, because regional plans. I'm
sorry?
I was going to say regional plans and all those sorts of things are guiding documents. And it's good to have people around the horseshoe who are making decisions that have good experience in knowing what those documents are all about. And
it's interesting to note that being a planner, when you plan a subdivision or plan anything in terms of development, you have to talk with different departments. There's the Parks Department. Then there's the Engineering Department, because they got to provide sewers and services. Then there's the transportation people who get involved. Then you got to talk with the people who do the bus routes. And then you're now talking with the legal people, because you need subdivision agreements, bylaws prepared, etc. Yep. So you got to make sure that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. Then you got to go to the clerk's department, because you got to bring it out through council.
Yeah, okay, slow down. I don't want to scare anybody from running. So, but you also
you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know, and you also have an understanding of budgets too, right? I mean, that's important.
Exactly. And although budgets are an important thing, and I was never really part of developing the budgets when I was at the city, but I had a very close contact with John Gazzola, because he started right at the same time as I did in '73, and we had a close relationship of working together. And I was also involved with development charges. I was involved with the first development charges in the city back in 1980, even before they became known as development charges.
Yeah.
They were called lot levies in those days.
Right.
I don't know if you remember that term or not. So I had to
vaguely, yeah.
Together for staff and for council as to responsibilities for developers. So I was working with a lot with the finance people, especially with John Gazzola, because he was dealing with putting the budgets together.
And development charges over time have become very important sources of revenue for new growth, paying for new development and infrastructure, right? New pays for new, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. So that was one of my babies as well.
Yeah. So you've got all this experience coming in. You could like hit the ground running. What were some of the things do you remember back in 2010? What are some of the things you?
Well, basically, council at that time had also expanded from 6 wards to 10.
Oh, okay.
And so all of a sudden we had, I think, 7 new faces on council.
Wow.
Okay. So, Carl Zare was reelected as mayor, and Barry Verbanovich was there already.
Yeah.
And somebody else, Kelly Galloway. Other than that, everybody else was new because there's 4 new wards.
Yeah.
And 3 people did not run from before. And so everybody's new. However, I was the one who had the most experience from having working with the city. Well, John Gazzola was also on council, I forgot. So he had all the financial experience as well.
Oh, okay.
How it operates. He was also the former CAO. So he had the whole
CFO.
The CFO, the whole grasp of the city.
Yeah.
So anyways, I had all of the municipal planning background. So I was able to, I went in there to even coach the new councillors what to do and where to go, how to operate, and how everything looks. And so just after we got elected, it's just before Christmas. And what's the first big thing that we're dealing with? The budget for next year.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
That's
everybody's going, and it's not a document like this. It's
I know.
You got a lot of reading. There's capital and there's operating.
Well, we've got that going on at the region. I mean, that's the first thing. We've got a lot of new people, newly elected. And for some people, like the mayors, they're not only dealing with the regional budget, they've got their own city budget. So they've got it times 2.
That's right.
It's almost like it should be a different time of year. And you don't have this overwhelming situation where you're just learning all sorts of things about the new job, and then now you've got to deal with a budget. It's a massive undertaking.
Well, you can certainly tell on the new councillors that they were overwhelmed. It was just, I wouldn't say struggling, but I was very impressed with what had to be done. And there's a lot of reading. It's not only reading. Now you got to come up with questions to question as to why we're doing this, why we're doing that. Staff would make their presentations. But I mean, there's so much to absorb that you can't question everything. However, I relied on John Gazzola to a degree because he had done finance and he had prepared those budgets. So we had this previous working relationship. So I had a lot of background from him as to what to do. But for the other councillors, it was like, holy mackerel. It's like, okay, yes, so I understand. And they just agreed with everything, basically.
So you can see in a situation like that, even though people elect you to make these decisions and ultimately you're responsible for the decisions, you're making decisions on things that if you're new, you really have not a lot of understanding of. And so you're relying on staff a lot with respect to those situations.
Exactly. But I was able to question staff.
Yeah, you could because
I knew the background of how things operate, etc.
Yeah, and not everyone's but not every council is going to have someone like John Gazzola with 30 years experience.
Oh, exactly.
Putting budgets together. So so that would be a difficult thing. So once you got past budgets, what were some of the other things that do you recall during your first term that were problems to deal with?
Well, the first year, and this goes back now quite a bit of time.
Just your first term, things in your first term without that specific, right?
Yeah. Well, I know there was the issue with the washrooms out in Victoria Park. There was the issues with we call it, I guess you can call it the Coach Restaurant or Coach, the one in Victoria Park that's on the lake. So
the building, in the building there, the boat
in the building. And trying to keep it going because it had a nice character to it, overlooking the Victoria Park Lake, and it could be utilized for entertainment, restaurant, etc. And it seemed to be struggling to succeed. Parking was an issue. The building was sort of falling apart to some degree. It needed a replacement. So how much money do you want to put into it? Those became topics of concern as well. One of the other topics of also concern was going down to, and it wasn't in my ward, but it was down by Conestoga College, was the issue with student housing.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. I think that's a good topic, especially with your background.
Right.
There was a developer I had read up. There was a developer that wanted to put in a fairly large, I think, apartment building or town home.
Well, it was sort of like a walk-up apartment building, you can put it that way. But it really wasn't an apartment building. It was student housing. But what was happening in the zoning bylaw that was happening already there at Conestoga College, of course, 80% of the people the students who attended the college commuted from wherever they lived. There's also a building that was built at the corner of Homer Watson and Pinnacle Drive and New Dundee Road that I had worked on to provide for the college. I think it was an 8-story building, student housing, specifically tied in with Conestoga College. And we got that approved. And there was room to do a second one as well. However, some of the developers decided to buy a single-family house, convert some of the rooms into lockable rooms, and then have students move in.
Like a rooming house, almost.
Like a rooming house, yeah, to that degree. And it was lodging houses that was also, they were calling it.
Okay.
So basically, you had a single-family house with 4 or 5 or 6 unrelated people living there.
Right.
So with a single-family house, which is called single-family, then now it's called single-detached. Basically, it was a family, husband and wife, 2, 3 kids, whatever,
right.
and that was considered a single-family house. But what they took that house and just put 4 students in there.
Yeah.
Okay, students were some of them were good, some of them were bad, but the bad ones created the trouble. Because they were having parties, they were having friends coming over.
Let me ask you. So this is all in the Dune area, and I mean, Conestoga College needs places for the kids to live that are going to the school. I guess. Are these rooming or boarding houses? Are they getting permission from the city to establish, or they're just doing them like illegally?
Illegally.
Oh.
They're saying, hey, what's the definition of a family?
Right.
It became a social type issue that was challenged at the board, I understand. So does a family could be an unrelated family? Four guys living together or 4 girls living together?
It can't be 4 strangers living together.
But that's what they are, 4 strangers living together.
I know, that's what they are. But are you saying that there was an argument for that?
But they have their own individual bedroom.
Yeah.
But they use a common space, the living area, the kitchen, and they cook together and live together, sort of live together as a single family,
like a communal family.
Yeah. If some houses were like that, and they didn't become a problem. The problem came down to is the parties, and then all of a sudden those 4 students had 4 vehicles, so there was no room in the driveway, so they started parking on the front lawn. But it's the parking, it was the partying that got out of control.
But let's get to this. There was a certain development proposal, though, right? So you've got the individual houses getting converted, but somebody actually came forward with a project that would have been like, I don't know, 40 units or whatever it was. What was the larger proposal, right? And
I forget the guy's name. I think it was Olivier or Oliver or something. But anyways, he came in and wanted to do it, and the residents were hesitant because we don't want that housing backing onto our backyard.
Right.
And if you're going to have more students clumped together, the partying will be even louder and greater.
And the property wasn't zoned to allow what he wanted to do, right?
Yeah, you had to rezone it. And that's where the residents fought with the zone change, et cetera.
So when somebody wants to change the zoning, they come to the city. with it. They make an application. You know the drill,
Yep.
and you're asking for a zone change. And so you hire your own planners to say why it's going to fit into the neighborhood and why it should be changed. And then, but the city's got to come back with a report.
That's correct. City's got to do the report. And now the problem with that becomes is that when you look at land use, you look at the buildings, you look at parking, you look at setbacks, all those variety of issues. You don't look at who's going to be living in there.
Right. But you look at the neighborhood, you look at the neighborhood though, too, right? In terms of where you're sticking this thing.
Yeah. And it's mostly single family housing occupied by a husband and wife and 1 or 2 or 3 kids.
And this thing was going to be what, 4 stories or something, or
yeah,
3 stories?
3 stories.
Okay.
But the problem with the thing is that planning, the zoning bylaw cannot dictate
right
the composition of who lives there.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
It's a social issue.
Yeah.
It's not a planning issue.
Right.
But basically, when you look at the history, 99% of the houses that are built are occupied by a husband and a wife, or
or anyway, a partner, whatever they are.
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
and then
Okay.
they have 1 or 2 kids. Maybe the grandmother move in because she's got some health issues.
Right.
And she has the other bag.
The reason I'm harping on this particular project, because there's a good story here and a good lesson for the listeners on this project. So the developer brings it forward, staff looks at it. You have some community consultations, right? Some community meetings.
Yeah, public meetings. Yeah.
And then they'll come out and express their concerns, right, about it being in the neighborhood and traffic and partying and the size doesn't fit, all those sorts of. The traffic's always a big one, right?
Well, traffic is because if they have 2 or 3 cars or 4 cars, and then it becomes an issue. Some students don't even have a car, and it never became an issue for that particular dwell.
Right. But on this project, though, you didn't like this project in that spot, right?
Well, see, this is the problem that comes down to is if it fits the definition under the official plan of accommodation and housing, and it fits under the zoning bylaw under the zoning category or R2A or R2 or whatever you put it under for multiple housing, then you got to meet the bylaw in terms of setbacks and parking requirements and height and stuff of that nature. But you can't deal with who lives there.
No, I know, but let's forget about that. You already established that. What I'm getting at is this.
But that's what the residents are concerned about. They say, a 3-story building, we can live with that. Yeah, parking's okay. But we don't want the students in there because they cause problems with partying.
Right. So going forward then, Zyg, staff comes back because the developer is proposing to do things differently than what's allowed in the bylaw or the zoning right?
Well, he tries to comply with it. But he basically does.
Did this project comply with it?
Yes, it would. From a planning perspective of setbacks, parking, height.
Okay.
Number of bedrooms.
So then staff comes back with a report and says he meets all the requirements. And it should be approved.
And staff can say, well, we don't have any grounds to refuse it.
What did council do?
Council then hears it, and the residents come down and say, yes, he meets the setback. Yes, they meet the parking. But it's all the partying and the noise and the parking all over the front lawn that we don't like. I have a nice single family house right next door. I cut the grass. I take care of the property. And my neighbor next door, there's garbage all over the place. They don't even collect it.
Zyg, I got you. But what did council do?
Well, they some of them, sometimes they approve it and sometimes they don't.
All right. And what did they do on this one?
And they turn it down to go to the Ontario Municipal Board.
Okay, but that's the story here. This is the important story here, okay?
Right.
So you've got a situation where the developer comes forward, it's got his planning team, and your city planning looks at it and says, this should be approved, right? Yep. So now the councillor, the elected officials have this report. They've got a developer with his planners that say why it fits. They got their own staff saying why it should be approved. All the indicators are there for council to say, I guess we got to approve it. But in this case, council looked at some other issues, like you said, the social issues that are not part of planning per se, and said, we're turning this down, right?
Right.
And now, because and a lot of times people say, well, we can't turn this down because it'll just go to the OMB or OLT or LPAT or whatever, and we're going to lose, right?
Yep.
But that's not what happened in this situation, is it?
They turned it down, and
Council turned it down.
The Ontario Municipal Board turned it down.
Right. They supported the residents.
They supported the residents, yeah, because
which is rare.
Which is rare, because one of the arguments that came out was that you're cramming too many units and people into a space, and using the expression, trying to put 10 pounds of sugar into a 5-pound bag.
Yeah, that was the phrase you used, and I think they used it at the hearing too. But you said, but yeah, okay, you're cramming a large building into a small space, but your staff still said it was okay
because they couldn't find any reasonable argument to turn it down.
So the 10 pounds of sugar into a 5-pound bag wasn't a reasonable argument to turn it
No,
down.
they just accepted it. But I used that on council to go against it.
I know. So this is what's interesting about this story, is because, sometimes councillors think, oh, okay, well, staff is supporting it, we're going to turn it down. Because when you go to the hearing, if you want to maintain your position, now you're at the hearing, you got the residents fighting it because they're trying to defend it. You got the planner or the developer who's bringing it to the hearing because they just lost at their council vote. So they're going to OMB.
Yep.
And they're bringing their experts. They got the city staff report. So either the city is going to fight to defend the council decision, which means you got to now hire some other experts maybe, or the citizens go there and fight it and hire their own experts.
Yeah. And the citizens have a very difficult, because they don't want it there, but now they got to raise money to hire a lawyer or a planner to defend them. And we're not talking a couple $100. We're into thousands of dollars.
No, you're talking tens of thousands. And
yeah. Whereby then you got to pay for it out of your own pocket, and of course maybe you can muster the community to chip in a few bucks. Whereby the developer, that becomes a business expense. He can write it off as a part of doing business.
Or if the city would have participated, but I don't know if the city participated in this one. If the city stays on the sideline,
they have to be there because it goes through council, whether it's approved or refused. The city has to be there.
But it depends how much they're defending, though. That's the thing.
That's the thing. Are they strongly defending it, or are they just saying we're just appearing because it happens to be here to answer?
I think they might have just appeared, and I don't think they hired their own expert to support their opinion to refuse it. And I think it was left up to the citizens. But I think it's a great story because it shows that there are times when you have good arguments that you can be successful, even though the developers, planners, and the city planners support it. It's one of those rare situations, but it's a very interesting story. Yeah. And I think from your planning perspective, maybe you recognizing some of the issues, like the social issue you talked about, which is not necessarily planning, but it's a consideration, probably helped in guiding your decision and maybe helped council decide.
Well, I hope so, because it's not a unanimous vote on that.
So that I thought was a really interesting story. Now, I want to shift over to something that's actually in your ward, which is Belmont Village.
Yep.
Right. So Belmont Village is in your ward. And, we all see that as a little jewel in our community. I mean, with the shops and everything. And during your time as an elected representative in that area, it probably was that back then, too. What was talk about your involvement with Belmont Village?
Well, Belmont Village was created back in the 40s, 50s when the stores that got built. And I
got braces. I got braces in Belmont Village. One of the dentists there.
Anyways, it was a nice niche of a community that was self-sufficient, but not part of a plaza, sort of speaking. But you can just go angle parking, and go do shopping, whatever. One of the first Zayre stores was located in Belmont Village back in the 50s, and other businesses had followed through and basically provided all the typical little shopping that you need, from a butcher shop to hairdresser, banking, restaurants, convenience stores, a gas station, and all a little community in itself. And it was wonderful. But eventually, there's the planning as it was growing. and that was already off council at the time.
Well, we won't get into the off council stuff. We're just going to stick to on council. What did you do to help Belmont Village while you were on council?
Well, we basically did try to make it grow and just expand it in terms of activities and making it more usable and having more people come. Make sure that the businesses are doing really, really well. And to do that, we try to do activities. I brought forward cruise nights on there, trying to do it on a weekly basis. It didn't quite work out, but we did it on a monthly basis during the summer.
Right.
And of course, it's all weather related. If it's a pouring rain and you get a specific date, that's unfortunate. But most of the time, it worked out pretty good. We had music, we had activities, we had prizes that you could win for the people who would show up. You got coupons to go to the restaurant and the businesses to support them. So that was where we did a mural on the side. I don't know if you can picture the 50s mural on one of the buildings where the Pharma Plus building is right now.
Oh, okay, all right.
I put that all together and got that done. I wanted to do more as we moved on in the future. So it was activities like that. Then we had one with the winter Santa Claus is coming to town for the seasonal thing just before end of November, and had not sleigh rides, but horse rides in the community and activities and dog parades and a variety of things just to bring people out.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
It's got a unique boulevards, the streetscaping, where you park, and all that. It's surprising to me we don't see more Belmont Village type developments around.
Williamsburg in Fisher Hallman and westbound intersection there. That sort of is the next one that came around with the Schlegels, and that was
like 50 years later.
Yeah, and that's a very good project, and that's doing well there as well.
Yeah, it's a great project. Yeah, absolutely.
But what was now causing a problem was the zoning had changed because the council had approved more higher density in certain locations.
Yeah, okay. But we're not getting into today's problems. We're talking about you when you were on council.
But that's what's caused another problem, and that's another story in itself.
So, one other thing. When you got elected, did you get put on the Heritage Committee?
Yes.
Good for you.
Well, you choose the committees that you want to be on.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be on Heritage, and it was fine. And I ended up being on other committees as well. They want you.
No, but I was just curious because they didn't put you back on, and then you got elected and you got yourself back on. So good for you.
And so I was on the Heritage Committee for the 8 years while I was there.
Yeah. There were a couple of, I'm not going to say minor or whatever, but there was where public consultation, you had concerns about whether there was a sufficient level of public consultation on issues, which I think is a good thing to always bring up. And two of them, one was that ice rink renovation that was happening in the two rinks at the back of the auditorium. You had the Olympic size ice, and then they were going to reduce it down to the NHL size ice, for example.
Right.
And that was during your time. And you had some, and I guess you were an old industrial hockey player.
Yeah, I play old timers hockey, and I still do. And at that time, the intent was to downsize the width of the hockey rink.
Yeah, from Olympic size, right, down to
NHL size. But the reason they were going to do that because the buildings, the ice rinks had already been there for 40 years, and the freezing of the pipes under the surface of the concrete, it was starting to deteriorate. They noticed that the flows were an issue on their dials, and work needed to be done. You just couldn't fix it. You really had to come and rip it out and replace it, put brand new piping.
You weren't really happy with that change in the size.
No, the work that had to be done underneath was fine. The reduction I was not happy with because a lot of us like the Olympic size rink. Now the auditorium is just a regular NHL size.
Sure, yeah.
But when the Kinsman and Kiwanis were built behind, they were built as Olympic size ones, because that's where a lot of the stuff was happening with the Olympics, and maybe training would be coming of Canadian teams coming to our city, and you could utilize those facilities for their training. And I thought that was a great thing. Rim Park also had the same scenario. But staff, no, we got to do the NHL. The Canvas minor hockey people and their committees said, no, we weren't happy. Those big rinks are a little too big for the 5 and 6 year olds. To skate on.
I got it. So there wasn't broad enough consultation.
Well, they had just the people who used the rinks. There was nothing to do with public out in the open.
Right. And then there was you had an issue on the renaming of the square,
City Hall Square.
Yeah. And then there you would have liked more public consultation on that.
Yes. What was happening was that the mayor at that time, Carl Zer, had been probably the longest mayor around for the city Kitchener. Yeah. And he was stepping down and from running in the next election, which should be 2014. And so he made an announcement. So staff says, well, in recognizing what his contributions as the longest serving mayor after Dom Cardillo had that initial role, we should name something after him. So, of course, the auditorium got named Dom Cardillo Auditorium.
Arena,
at the Memorial Auditorium.
Yeah.
Inside was the Dom Cardillo Arena.
Yes.
And so we said, well, we have to do something for Carl Zer. So staff came up with the suggestion of naming the City Hall Square as the Carl Zer Square.
Yeah.
No public consultation. It just went right behind closed doors. And they said, here it is. We have to do this right away because there's a timing issue. I can't remember exactly to what degree it was a timing issue, but we have to do it in 2 weeks. No public consultation. And so an internal vote, and I voted against it because it should be public, and it didn't go that way. I lost another one.
That's okay. I mean, it just
I was doing my job.
Right. Dust off and move on. So 2014 election, how was that for you, the municipal election?
I got reelected. It was fine. People liked me, and it was more or less smooth sailing.
Yeah. And were there any, during that 2014 to 2018 period, was there any significant issues that you were dealing with? Do you recall?
Speed bumps were one issue, and then speeding. What was one of the concerns? Most of the issues were individual little problems that the constituents had.
Right.
Sewage blockage, trees falling from the city property in my backyard, stuff of that nature. Big issues, more not in my ward, but basically they were all citywide sort of stuff. The LRT was an issue. Coming about, asking me for my position, and I said, "Well, it's a regional decision, not a city decision." Yeah, but we still want to know where you stand on it, And
who was asking your position? Who?
Oh, just constituents when you were going door to door.
Yeah, in the election. Yes,
and during the election, and a lot of the time, the people were confused as you're running for the city. And they're asking regional questions, or vice versa. So, and they said, well, I don't know, is westbound road a regional road or city road? You tell me, that they're telling me. And so, I have to tell them and explain the differences. So, people got confused at times. And so you had to help them out with the LRT, thinking that it's a city decision.
Well, that's interesting during an election because we were talking about this not too long ago. In a municipal election, you could have the mayor, you could have 4 or 5 candidates. You got your ward councillor, could be 3 or 4 or 5 candidates. You got your regional councillor representatives. So you're picking 4 out of a list that could be 13 names. You got your school board where you're picking a few off of a long list. And you got your regional chair, which could be, you're picking 1 out of a list of 4 or 5. So it's a lot of names on a ballot to try and figure out who's who and who's what.
So add them all up. So you're voting for about 10 positions or 10 people that you would choose, from the mayor to councillor to regional
to school board.
And you've got, out of 10, at least maybe 30 people running in total, and they're not represented by parties, Liberal, NDP, Conservative, whatever. they're all individual. And then you have newcomers, and then you have people who are running for reelection. Do the research of each person to try to find out what their background is and interest, what they want to do for the reason for running, or the people who have already been on council for 4 years or 8 years, how their voting patterns were. Are you happy with them or not? And to do all that research, it's a hell of a big job.
It is.
And a lot of the candidates, especially when you get down to the councillors or the school board, they don't have any literature that they deliver door to door.
Yeah.
There's nothing on their website, or they don't even have a website. So how do you know who you're voting for?
How do you know what they stand for?
Or stand for?
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Whereby provincial and federal elections, you got 3 or 4 or 5 parties. You're only going in to vote for one person.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty simple. It's pretty
Very
simple.
You're in and out. You have to have a list that you have to bring in with you to figure out who's on first and who's on second.
Yeah, I don't know.
And it's hard.
Yeah.
That's why you get a poor turnout for municipal elections. It's overwhelming.
That's one of them. I mean,
and now we've got 57 candidates, elected people in our region. Are we going to have amalgamation? There's another topic.
Only Doug Ford knows, I think, Zyg. But listen, let me ask you this then. So we're near the end. So what is your advice for someone who's thinking about running? Because you had a lot of experience in municipal politics. So for you to step in, it was almost hand to glove. Like you could, it was like riding a bike. You get back in there. You knew what was what. There were some things like the budget that you didn't have as much experience, but you had enough, and you could get a little more from John Gazzola, for example. But on planning, no problem, hands down. And you understood how the city works and the municipality works and stuff. What advice would you give for people who are thinking about running, but don't have that sort of experience?
Well, the main thing is you got to get involved in the city in terms of the different committees that are available, whether it's the Heritage Committee, whether it's Kitchener Compass, and there's a whole list. You can get involved with your community centers by sitting on those committees and being involved with small groups. It basically means you have to have an interest on it. You should attend council meetings. So you know how it operates. Talk to politicians. If there's public meetings taking place in your backyard for a zone change or a subdivision, go to those meetings. If you agree with what's happening, that's fine. But you should still go there, because you may have one opinion, but your next door neighbor may have the opposite, and you want to know why they have that opinion. Yeah. And so when you collect all these opinions, then you have to come and make maybe a decision as to, well, if I was on council, would I be supporting it or not supporting it? I have to hear both sides of the argument, whether it's from the residents or from the consultant and from the developer or from the staff. There's different points.
Yeah, it's good to get out there and get that experience. So it's like doing homework. You can't just sort of show up and expect to. You can be more effective the more experience you gain prior to running, for example. I guess you could just show up and run and get elected, and eventually you would learn. But I think you would be more effective earlier with the experience you would get from doing some of the things you talked about.
Yeah, that's the key. And if you've had a municipal government job of some time, even though you worked at the region or the province or federally, you see how the government operates. I mean, sure, it's a different level, but there's protocol, there's process, there's bylaws and bills. It all ties in together. And of course, you are representing the public no matter which level you're at.
Yeah. So, Zyg, let me ask you, how would you describe your experience over those 8 years?
Oh, very enlightening. Very, I loved it. I love being on council. I mean, there's a lot of crap that happens behind closed doors and opinions. But I also found that when you're representing constituents, I found that 98% of the constituents were the easiest people to deal with.
Right.
If they had an issue and contacted you by a phone call or an email, and you replied back within the same day and tried to help them, and you worked with them and worked with them, then it was great. But if you ignore them, and I know there's a lot of councillors who just ignore you, because when I was on council, I would get the phone call from another ward because their councillor was not responding to them because they didn't like being hassled or didn't like the position. And so I would go to, and then he'd get upset because now I'm in his ward helping him out, helping his constituent out. And he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, you didn't answer his phone."
I got you. Yeah.
So I decided to help him out. You don't like it? Do something about it.
Yeah. Well, listen, Zyg, I want to thank you for the time today. Some good advice and some good points there. And we hear that common theme. You got to help people out. You got to respond to them. And it's important in your role as the counselor to get back to people, to let them know that they're being heard. I think that's the most important thing. Nothing more frustrated than thinking you're being ignored, for sure.
Exactly.
So thanks, Zyg, for the time, and I wish you all the best, and all the best in future vacations for you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on here. It's a pleasure for providing my opinions and advice and experience that I've enjoyed, and it was really worth doing.
That's good to know. It's good to know, and hopefully other people will be encouraged by those words and take the plunge. So all the best, Zyg.
Yep. Thank you, Rob.